Welcome to Decoding Art. I'm Barry McGrill, your instructor. This video is meant to get us prepared for a fuller discussion of ancient work and Renaissance art when we meet in Zoom. Roughly 400 years after the Parthenon was created, that's the Parthenon that we're looking at in this module this week, something called the Laocoon group, depicting the high priest Laocoon and his sons being attacked by sea serpents during the Trojan Wars, was created. It's nearly life-size at over 6 feet tall, including the base. It's incredibly expressive, and the figures are highly contorted. And this has come to symbolize human grief and agony. In various ancient stories, the priest Laocoon and his two sons are attacked to prevent the warriors hidden inside the Trojan horse from being discovered. There have been other interpretations of it too, but this is the main one from the Trojan Wars stories that come down to us from those ancient times. So I think something like the gods sent down these serpents to attack Laocoon so that the soldiers inside the horse wouldn't be discovered and that they could come out in the middle of the night and murder all of the enemy soldiers. That was, I think, the end of the Trojan War. But let's look very closely at the sculpture. It was made sometime, we think, between 323 BCE, before Christ, maybe up until around the year 30 in the Common Area after Christ. So that's a huge period of time, right? 300 years, we're not exactly sure. But it's important to note that it was rediscovered in 1506, when it had been unearthed in a burial pit near the Colosseum in Rome. That date is really significant because it's just toward the mature part of the Renaissance in Italy, which is a rebirth of classical ideals from ancient Greece and Rome. The readings of ancient Greeks and Romans were being rediscovered and read again for the first time in hundreds and hundreds of years. As well, sculpture and architecture was being rediscovered as well. Some of it literally had to be put back together again. And so when they rediscover and unearth this sculpture, it didn't seem to make a great deal of sense chronologically with the standing still and archaic type figures shown here that are more associated with the high archaic period in ancient Greece and Rome. Right? The Romans copied a lot of what the Greeks did, and a lot of what we have in Greek sculpture comes to us only because of Roman copies. But you can see how they're still, they're standing, they hardly seem to be moving, they're exhibiting a kind of perfection in harmony and in proportion, and this was considered the high point of ancient Greece and Rome. By who? By art historians of the 18th century. So another 300 years after this, we have kind of the invention of modern art history. Starts more or less in Germany, where they start to look at these chronological timelines of putting this ancient work together and making a continuity with it all the way up until the Renaissance. And so philosophers, sort of part-time art historians like Hegel, who was a German, looked at the Laocoon group and he said, I see. The world culture is historically moving toward perfection all the time, but every once in a while it hits a speed bump. And he thought that the Laocoon group, because of its contorted figures, and it was kind of gaudy to him, that was their mindset in the 18th century, is that it was a turning back on itself of art production rather than moving toward perfection, right? The perfection were these very meticulously laid out static figures that were all perfect in their harmony in relation to the human body. But then we've got this Laocoon group, which he determined must have happened much later in that period, which is why we date it sometime, 300 years before Christ or maybe just afterwards, when antiquity was starting to fold in on itself And then Hegel and others said, well, and then after that speed bump period, we continue to move on toward perfection. And that's how he saw it. Thankfully, we've come to believe in our era that the quest for perfection is a much more subjective thing, and we see art differently to begin with. So it leaves us with a question of how to make meaning of art of the past. And that's what we're looking at this week. I mean, we could apply that to art of the present, too. What matters to us, the viewers, when we're looking at it? That's what we have to ask. Do we really need to know every little bit of history of a particular work of art to appreciate it? Probably not. In my opinion, it's best to find a way into the meaning of an artwork from some kind of personal experience mixed with the interests of culture that we're living in. And that leads me to a recent analysis or reanalysis of the Lacan group. It's recently been studied in physiological terms. It's pretty interesting. A new researcher has looked very closely at the expressions on Lacan's face. It has always troubled art historians, but nobody really looked at him in terms of human physiology. So apparently this new study has deemed it physically impossible to make the expression on Lacan's face, particularly if in the area of his forehead and around his eyes, because his forehead and his eyebrows are doing two different things at the same time, and that's impossible. He's sort of wrinkling his brow and he's furrowing his forehead at the same time. So take a minute and see if you can do this. Purse your eyes together, right, like you're thinking, and raise your eyebrows at the same time to make your forehead furrowed, right, to get wrinkles above your eyebrows. You can't do both of those things at the same time. Either the eyebrows come together or your eyebrows go up. You can't do both. So this begs a really big question. Why was this set of expressions depicted during the Hellenistic period? Right, this period about 300 years before Christ, maybe just a little bit afterwards. Why was this depicted then? So do you think that it's a way to intensify human expression? Right? Remember that what's going on here is Lacan and his sons are being attacked by these massive serpents that are squeezing and killing them, sort of like a boa constrictor. And so he would be in a great deal of pain, but he's also in a great deal of anguish, right? Because he's trying to do the right thing, which is to reveal the soldiers inside the Trojan horse, but he's being thwarted. And at the same time, it's not just himself who's being attacked, it's his sons, right? His offspring, his future. So all of this is coming crashing down on him for doing what he thought was the right thing, but of course you can't cross the gods. So they'll always win, I guess, or, certainly he didn't have the power, right? He's a high priest, but he's not magical. So in a way, I would ask if this is a visual form of a scream. It doesn't make any actual sound, but it's so contorted we can kind of feel it, and we're meant to feel it very deeply in our soul. So in the 16th century, when it was discovered, I would ask you this. What famous sculptor do you think might have been intensely influenced by the dramatic expressions, and particularly the depiction of the human body being all twisted and turning in a violent movement? I'll give you one hint. Charlton Heston played him in the film The Agony and the Ecstasy from the 1960s. Only the over-the-top style of Charlton Heston could ever match what we think of this artist. Extra points if you can name that the actor who played the Pope opposite Charlton Heston in the film. That's enough from me this time. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say in our weekly discussions in our Zoom class. See you then.